When we think about Japanese culture, a lot of things come to mind, right? The politeness, the incredible sense of order, that unique aesthetic. But what if the real reason behind it all isn't some complex philosophy or social code, but something much, much more fundamental? Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating theory that says the soul of Japan is literally tied to the ground it's built on. Let's get into it.
Look, trying to figure out why Japan is the way it is, that's not a new game. For centuries, people both inside and outside the country have been totally captivated by what makes its society so distinct. There's literally a whole genre of books just dedicated to explaining the Japanese.
And you've probably heard some of the usual suspects, right? Theories about the samurai code, Bushido, or this idea of a super rigid, hierarchical society. And yeah, those things describe certain traits for sure. But they don't really get to the bottom of it. They tell us what's happening, but they don't really tell us why. And that's the real mystery we're trying to solve here. Why did these specific cultural traits grow so deep in Japan and not somewhere else? What's the ultimate source code? That's what we're here to try and figure out.
Okay, so let's start our search for that fundamental why of Japan. We're going to move past just describing things and really try to find the origin story.
The theory we're exploring today starts somewhere you might not expect. Not with philosophy, not with politics, but with the land itself. It's an idea from a field called Kokudogaku, which basically argues that if you really want to understand a people, you have to first understand the piece of earth that shaped them.
So the core idea here is that a nation's character gets forged by what its people went through together on their land. And it's not just about what they faced over thousands of years. It's also, and this is crucial, about the kinds of challenges they didn't have to face.
And according to this theory, the deepest differences between cultures are rooted in the most profound, most universal human experience of all, how we deal with loss.
And this brings us right to the heart of the argument. It's a tale of two very different kinds of death. The idea is that societies were fundamentally shaped by whatever the biggest, most common threat to their loved ones was. So, what was that threat?
Okay, here it is. This slide lays out the fundamental split. The theory says that for pretty much all of history, across that huge Eurasian continent, the biggest danger to your family wasn't a storm or a flood, it was other people, war, invasions. But for Japan, this isolated, geologically active island nation, the number one threat was always nature itself. And this single difference, the argument goes, changes absolutely everything.
Now that's a pretty big claim, right? So let's look for the evidence. If human conflict was the main threat in Eurasia, what would you expect to find when you look back through history? Well, you'd expect to find defenses. A lot of them.
And what do you know? That is exactly what we find. From the very beginning of civilization, cities like Uruk in Mesopotamia were built behind huge walls. Paris started as a fortified island and was still building massive new defensive walls well into the 1840s. This pattern, building walls to keep people out, it just repeats itself all across the continent for thousands of years.
So the obvious question is, what were they defending against? Well, it wasn't earthquakes, and it wasn't typhoons. They were defending against other human beings. Now let's try to get a sense of the sheer scale of that threat. Okay, let's just grab one example. One single conflict from the 1600s, the 30 Years' War. The death toll? An estimated 7.5 million people. And this wasn't just some historical footnote. This war was so massive it helped create the entire modern system of nation-states. And that was just one war. Think about the Mongol conquests in the 13th century. The numbers are staggering, maybe as many as 40 million people killed. This constant, large-scale death at the hands of other humans, it's like the relentless drumbeat of Eurasian history.
Now, here's the kicker. When you look at this long, brutal history of massive, continent-spanning wars, Japan is basically a no-show. It just did not experience foreign invasions or internal wars on anything close to this scale. For the Japanese people, mass death came from a completely different direction.
So if you have these two completely different histories of how people lose their loved ones, it just makes sense that you'd end up with two completely different ways of grieving, right? This is where you can really see the psychological echo of that history.
Think about it. In a history that's just full of human conflict, when someone you love is killed by an enemy, that death feels preventable. It wasn't fate. It was a choice that another person made. So the natural response isn't quiet acceptance. It's rage. It's a demand for justice or maybe revenge. It's this deep, powerful refusal to accept that loss.
But in a history defined by natural disasters, the logic is totally flipped. You can't get revenge on an earthquake.
You can't go to war with the tsunami. The loss is just as terrible, but it's seen as something completely unavoidable, a force way beyond human control. So the psychological response that builds up over centuries isn't rage, it's this solemn acceptance. Let me show you a modern example.
Let's look at these two events. After a major earthquake in China, you saw reports describing really loud, public, and demonstrative grief. It's an outward expression of, I do not accept this. But then, you contrast that with the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan. The entire world was just stunned by how quiet, how orderly the Japanese response was. It wasn't that they didn't feel the pain. It was a cultural response, conditioned by a long history where these kinds of tragedies can only be endured.
So as we pull all these threads together, I want to be really clear about something. This isn't a value judgment. This theory is not arguing that one response is better or more civilized than the other. Not at all. It's simply about the deep, almost unconscious lessons that a very long history teaches a people.
The Eurasian experience, dominated by human conflict, teaches one core lesson over and over. Tragedy is often caused by other people, and because of that, it can and should be fought. So you build walls, you raise armies, you demand justice.
But the Japanese experience taught a very different lesson. Dominated by the awesome power of nature, its history showed that the greatest tragedies are often totally unavoidable. You can't fight them. You can only prepare for them, survive them, and ultimately endure them.
And that leaves us with a final question to chew on. If the land and its long, long history can be such a powerful, hidden force in shaping a culture, it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? How has your own history, on your own land, shaped the way you see the world? Thanks for joining me on this one.